Hello fellow malcontenters, welcome to another episode of Malcontent Corner, the corner where I hope to enlighten your life by explaining and teaching you the things that I have learned in the daily walk of mine. Now, as the title to this video said, my wife's Mercury Cougar sprung a brake leak. Now, basically the backstory is this: the little lady came to me a couple months ago and said, hey, the brake light's on the dash. It was wet out, so I did a preliminary check but couldn't really see anything. But in looking over the car, I noticed that the brake reservoir was a little low on fluid. Now, I wasn't sure if that was just because the pads had worn down to enough to where the brake level had just settled a little low, or if the system had an actual leak. So I topped it up, which took care of the brake light, and said, hey, give it a shot, let me know what happens. So what happened was, about 2 weeks later, the brake light came on again. Sure enough, I went out and checked, and the reservoir was low again. So that let me know that I had a brake leak. Now, I had to wait for everything to dry off from the ground to the car itself, and I went out and took a look, and I found what was leaking. I'll show you that video coming up next. Okay guys, so what I did was I pulled off the tire of the car and I found that this brake line here was getting wet. What's going on is this little item right here is leaking right here at this crimp. Okay guys, there you have it. That is what is leaking on the car. And here's what that component looks like outside of the car. Now, like a lot of people, I had no idea what this is, so I took to searching the internet. Thank God for that. 30 years ago, it was a lot harder to find out information. The first thing I found is a lot of people don't know what this is. Number two, if this does leak, it tends to leak up here at the upper crimp. Number three, if it does leak, it does tend to leak slowly. And number four, Ford calls this part a brake proportioning valve. So there you go, mystery number one solved. Now, admittedly, I've worked on a lot of cars over the years. I've never seen a brake proportioning valve there. And I think the reason for it is due to what was the original platform which the Cougar is based upon. Now, what I'm going to offer here is academic. It'll be a little long, but I'll try to tie it in with how I came up with the solution for this problem. If you're not interested in that, just fast forward to the point where I hold up the box. But if you hear me out here, don't take what I'm going to say as absolute gospel. It's just a lot of suspicion and speculation on my part. But if you hear me out, you'll probably find out I'm somewhat accurate on it. Now, from what I understand, the Mercury Cougar, the underpinnings of it, was based upon two models of cars which Ford and Mercury produced slightly earlier model year-wise. And that was the Ford Contour and the Mercury Mystique. Now, those were two cars which were produced from 1996 to 2000. The Cougar was produced from 1999 to 2002. So there was at least 2 years where all three cars were available to the US market. Now, in looking at the parts layout, or the parts list for both, or all three models, I should say, I found out that they share a lot of commonality. For example, the 2.5 liter Duratec V6 was available to all three cars. I suspect that if you have a 4-cylinder model, they share the same motors. In looking at individual parts, I found that the steering racks are the same, brake rotors tend to be the same, brake calipers tend to be the same. While I'm not 100% certain, I believe the Cougar might have been available with rear drum brakes. I know for a fact that the Contour was, but again, it seems as though they share a lot of common parts. Now, in looking at the Ford Contour and the Mercury Mystique, I came across a couple of moto rags at the time, and apparently these were two cars produced with kind of a US, they're a US car, but with a European flavor to them. And ultimately what I think it is that Ford America, or USA, went over to Ford Europe, lifted the blueprints for whatever car they were producing over there, brought it back here to the States, and just revamped it for the US market. Now, in looking at that, it was like, okay, this car is based upon these cars. I headed to the local salvage yard. I found 2 Contours there, no Cougars, no Mystiques. Both of them had rear drum brakes, neither one of them had this part. And looking at Ford USA, I found that this part is called out in all 3 models. So I suspect the common thread there is if you have one of these models with rear disc brakes, you probably have this part. Now, the problem here is where to get this part. Now, here in the States, I found out that there is just one manufacturer that has it. I've not been able to find any aftermarket manufacturers for this part. And the only one who does have it is Ford Motor Company. And at time of filming, the cheapest I've been able to find this for is $162. So once you figure in tax and shipping, you're probably looking at $200. And that's a lot of money. Now, here I'm going to tell you, never cheap out on your brakes. Just don't do it. If you have a choice between good, better, and best, pony up the extra bucks and get the best. Reason why? Your life, your family's life, or somebody else's life may depend on your ability to stop. However, $200 for what I think should be a durable good, a little spending and kind of a ripoff. Now, I could go to a salvage yard and try to find one of these. If I found one that looked dry, I could probably use it. It might last forever. It might last for 30 seconds. I don't know. But I don't have that luxury. Right now, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. There doesn't seem to be a lot of Cougars in the salvage yards. The one salvage yard I did look at, they had a couple Contours. Again, they had drum brakes. Neither one of them had this part. So, I'm kind of like, well, I don't want to spend $200. However, I found out that in looking that this part is actually seemingly used on cars over in Europe more commonly. In fact, it seems as though there's not 1, not 2, but 3 aftermarket manufacturers of this part. So I looked up the TRW version of it over in Europe, GPV 1271, and I found it on eBay. I was able to get it for about $72 US. Now, I did look, that part is not available here in the US. So if you go to TRW and type in that part number here in the US, it's going to come up with nothing. So I just got on eBay, looked up the part, had it shipped to me, again, about $72 US, and I'm here to tell you it was a perfect fit. So voila, that's why this part is out of the car. Now, admittedly, if you're in a rush, your best bet is either to buy it from Ford or go to a salvage yard if you can find it. Again, it's a slow leak. It's probably not super imperative that you get it fixed right away, but you certainly don't want to be driving around with a leaky brake proportioning valve. But if you're willing to order and take a little time, it took me about 2.5 weeks to get this part, go on eBay, look up GPV 1271. It fit, it worked perfectly, and now the car no longer leaks. So, if you should happen to have a Contour or Mystique or Cougar that is mysteriously losing brake fluid, and if you have rear disc brakes, take a look at your proportioning valves. You're probably going to find one of them is wet because it's probably slowly leaking. And if that's the case, again, TRW GPV 1271. Anyways, that is what I have for you here at this episode of Malcontent Corner. I hope you found this episode to be of some use to you, especially if you happen to have one of those 3 cars that I mentioned here. But as always, I do appreciate you taking the time to watch me and listen to me talk on my videos. I hope to see you back again here soon. Until then, do take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and we'll catch you back again here in the not too distant future. Okay? So until then, ciao!